Donald Trump has been an agent of the secretly reformed KGB for the last 40 years, and he secretly gets his orders from Moscow in a diplomatic pouch sent in a gold stork to the Trump Tower. And here's 300 tweets about it. That's BlueAnon to me.
This week, the Trump shooting merch boom. Content creators descend on the RNC. And our main topic, how BlueAnon took over the anti-Trump internet. I'm Taylor Lorenz, and that's all coming up right now on Power User. Minutes after a gunman attacked Donald Trump at a rally last weekend, conspiracy theories online began to flourish. It was a false flag. The Secret Service were in on it. Trump had a fake blood gel pack in his ear. This is the latest example of a phenomenon online called BlueAnon. It's an obvious play off QAnon, the right-wing conspiracy theory that alleges a global cabal of elites is trafficking children and secretly ruling the world. BlueAnon isn't one conspiracy, but rather it speaks to the growing conspiracism among anti-Trump influencers. For instance, conspiracies like Biden was secretly drugged before the debate, or ABC News intentionally doctored his audio to make him appear worse. We're seeing this BlueAnon conspiracism become more and more widespread. My guest today, Mike Rothschild, has done a lot of thinking about BlueAnon and QAnon. He's the author of The Storm is Upon Us, How QAnon Became a Movement, a Cult, and Conspiracy Theory of Everything. Hi, Mike. Welcome to Power User.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, can you tell me a little bit about the term BlueAnon? When did this phenomenon emerge, and where did this term come from?
I don't know who made up the term. It's probably one of those things where nobody made it up. It just appeared. And where it really started to take off in this sort of conspiracy industrial complex around Donald Trump really was the Russia investigation. And I think there were sort of two different strands of this. There were people who really understood that Trump has a lot of business connections in Russia. He's on a very similar wavelength as Vladimir Putin. He's very sympathetic to them. That's all real. We understand that. There were then people who told us that Donald Trump has been an agent of the secretly reformed KGB for the last 40 years, and he secretly gets his orders from Moscow in a diplomatic pouch sent in a gold stork to the Trump Tower. And here's 300 tweets about it. That's BlueAnon to me.
Yeah, I saw a lot of the BlueAnon stuff start to originate around the Russia stuff as well. And like you said, obviously we know that Russia played a role in trying to influence the landscape in 2016. When I first started seeing BlueAnon being used, it was used by these right-wing social media personalities like Jack Posobiec, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and others to kind of speak to what they felt like was this overblown media obsession with tying Trump to Russia and sort of like not really acknowledging the grassroots nature of a lot of Trump support in this country.
Right. And I think it was especially used by purveyors of conspiracy theories. Somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Jack Posobiec.
QAnon supporters.
One of these people exposing or accusing somebody else of being a conspiracy theorist. I mean, there's more projection there than a 30-screen multiplex.
Exactly. And I feel like the term kind of petered along until recently. Following Biden's really bad debate performance, you started to see the resurgence of these liberal, kind of centrist-driven conspiracy theories. These were things like the Secret Service secretly drugged Biden before the debate. Tell me a little bit about what you started to see post-debate and the types of conspiracies that these liberal groups are suddenly promoting.
Well, very quickly after the debate, I started to see these conspiracy theories that Biden's poor performance was not because of Biden performing poorly, but that someone did it to him. The first things I saw were his microphone was all messed up, that there was too much buzz, that his volume was too far down. And, you'd see somebody tweet like, my buddy's a sound man for a well-known band, and he told me that, nobody's microphone sounds like that. Okay, sure. Maybe we should address some of the actual issues going on with Biden's candidacy rather than making up conspiracy theories about why he sounded bad. But that's what people do. You make up a conspiracy theory because you don't want to acknowledge the truth. And of course, in this case, the truth is that Joe Biden had a disastrously bad debate performance. And we don't want to acknowledge that. So the conspiracy theories and the excuses start coming out.
Yeah, and you see this idea that it's these nefarious forces at work, and specifically it's elites and the media. I think, look, the media did undeniably do this about face pre and post debate, right? Post debate, it was 100% if you went to the NewYorkTimes.com, like wall-to-wall coverage, and I get it. Political reporters, they focus on things. There's horse race politics problems. I have lots of criticisms for the media. Sure. But I think that this notion that the media is somehow working to destroy, XYZ's favorite candidate is what's worrying to me. That starts to sound kind of QAnon, this notion of collusion and powerful secret forces.
Right. And I think we saw a really good example of the media taking something that wasn't really a story and turning it into a story when you had something like Hillary Clinton's health. Her collapse after the September 11th memorial. She was like thrown into a car and driven away. She was fine. She was like back on the campaign trail a day later. That wasn't a story. Biden's age, his whether he can do this job or not, whether he can win, his mental acuity, this is an actual story. This is a story that happens because the nominee for the Democratic Party is 81 years old. He will be 86 at the end of a second term. I don't think it's ageist or ableist or whatever to talk about this as an actual issue. I've known a lot of people in their 80s who were doing fine, and then they weren't doing fine. And I've been choosing to look at this through the lens of watching somebody age rather than some sort of a conspiracy between the boom mic guy at CNN and the, opinion publisher at the New York Times. That's ludicrous and it's unnecessary.
So when you're talking about this BlueAnon group online, do these people identify as BlueAnon? And who are some of the key figures that have been pushing some of these more extreme conspiracy theories?
Well, one of the things about conspiracy theorists is that they will never identify themselves as conspiracy theorists. They are researchers. They're citizen journalists. They're the truth tellers. The rest of us are the ones who are asleep. We're the ones who believe in the conspiracy theory. But, there's a real lack of kind of self-awareness with these people. And in terms of who's doing it, you're seeing accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers. I saw, people like Brooklyn Dad and the Jack Hopkins
These are like the
show.
Resistance.
The
yeah,
Resistance.
The hashtag Resistance.
Hashtag
liberals.
Resistance liberals who have just made careers off of doing this. A lot of these people, they're totally unknown outside Twitter. And on Twitter, they're superstars. So you can understand why some of these people would lean into these conspiracy theories for the same reason that a lot of right-wing influencers lean into conspiracy theories. That's their brand. That's what people expect of them.
Yeah, 100%. I think it just shows how more and more people are also getting their news from these influencer-driven accounts. I mean, to me, and the reason I wanted to write this BlueAnon story now is because it seems to have reached this critical tipping point where, especially post-shooting, what happened at the Trump rally this past weekend, almost immediately, a lot of these big liberal personalities started to push this idea that it was a false flag and everything was staged. And once again, this was, Trump up to his old hijinks, staging things. And you started to see that being pretty widespread believed, right? It was trending on Twitter. I saw people on Threads expressing this. It seemed to kind of break through in a way that I haven't seen some of those previous BlueAnon associated conspiracies break through.
Yeah, in the earliest kind of seconds and minutes after an incident like this happens, we don't know anything. The only thing that we know is what we already knew and what we already believed coming into it. So it's very natural for people desperate for information, is Donald Trump alive? Was he shot? What happened? Those are very natural questions. We don't have any of those answers in the first couple of minutes after an incident. But we love stories and we want to know what's going on. We don't want to feel left out. We want to feel like we've got the special secret knowledge. So we start making up conspiracy theories. We say, well, it looks like a movie. Well, we've all seen a lot of movies where a presidential candidate is assassinated. The actual ones and the movie ones, they look a lot alike. That doesn't mean it's fake. It just looks like what we think it looks like. We need to know what's going on. And in the absence of actually knowing what's going on, we just decide that we know. And we decide that we know based on the things that we already believe. We believe Trump is a showman. We believe, he knows things from his association with professional wrestling. Oh, he'd know how to get down on the ground and cut his ear to make himself look like he's bleeding. Nobody knows what's going on. Why not tweet it? What else are you going to do? But then we start to find out what happened. And in this case, that 2 people are dead. And you would think that would very quickly put an end to the idea that this was all fake. But by then, you've already invested in it. You already want to believe it.
A bunch of these people were saying, well, Trump has no problem killing his own supporters, right? Yeah. You've said that BlueAnon's roots are sort of similar in origin to MAGA. Can you talk about the parallels here?
I think the parallels between BlueAnon and MAGA is that they're kind of the photo negative of one another. MAGA is, Trump is the God King. He's the 12-dimensional genius. He always wins. And when he loses, he only loses on purpose so he can win bigger. BlueAnon is kind of taking all of that as true, but reversing it so that he's an evil genius. He always wins. We have to do something to stop him. So you understand why, when you see somebody like Trump, who just does seem to get away with everything, why people would make up conspiracy theories and a narrative for why he gets away with everything, because it's all part of a plot. And you don't think about, well, maybe he gets away with everything for the same reason that a lot of really wealthy white people get away with things. Because our justice system, our banking system, our media are kind of all run by these people. They look out for each other. They take care of each other. That's also a conspiracy, but it's not one that people want to really confront because it involves kind of introspection and not cheap clicks.
And systemic change, which is always hard.
And systemic change, right, which doesn't benefit a lot of these people either.
Yeah. What would you say, though, to all of the people that feel like this is drawing false equivalences? You know, after my story went up, I heard from a lot of Threads users, especially where a lot of these people congregate, saying, you know, well, look, Trump is this unique threat to democracy and Biden is not. And, you know, you need to talk about these things in terms of scale and impact. And, you know, you're overly focusing on this one small phenomenon and ignoring the bigger phenomenon, which I, by the way, reject when I've written so many stories on right-wing extremism. But talk about, you know, this notion of false equivalences.
Sure. And I think it's really important to point out that a lot of the right-wing conspiracy world really is built around this rotten core of racism and anti-Semitism and transphobia, Islamophobia. You know, I acknowledge all of that. That's all true. The problem is that conspiracy theories that desensitize you to reality and sort of force you into this cynical posture of everything is fake, everybody is lying to me, whether you're on the left or the right, that has a deadening effect on people. And I've seen it a lot on the right, and I'm starting to see it more on the left, this kind of joylessness and this cynicism and this inability to engage with reality. I don't think it's about the particulars of the photo op or how far the shooter was. That none of that stuff really matters that much. I think what it does is it trains you to just think everyone is lying to you and nobody can be trusted. And that's really bad for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, I think it just dismantles trust in all of our institutions that we need, right? And again, I have so many problems with the mainstream media. Literally built my career on media criticism. So I hate this idea that like I'm some staunch defender of the mainstream media. But I will say that having worked at places like the New York Times and the Post and a lot of other legacy places, what people are ascribing to malice is almost always incompetence, you know? Or an error, or, you know, a political reporter trying to get the story right and fucking up. Or look, there are people with agendas. There are bad editors, right? The Times does publish a lot of really evil shit on certain issues. I'm not arguing any of that. However, I think you're totally right in terms of this cult mindset and this idea of like helplessness. And it's like, it does matter. The truth does matter. Like we should care.
Absolutely.
If it was a false flag or not, right?
Right. We should care. And the idea of building a cult around Joe Biden to fight the cult around Donald Trump is not appealing or helpful. I mean, the number of people who the same yelled at me, who've been yelling at you, who've been yelling at Mehdi Hassan to just shut up, get in line. What's wrong with you? You must love Trump. You must love MAGA. Oh, didn't know you were a fascist. Unfollowing you. Well, I think that like a debate about something as critical as the mental acuity of the president is important. And it's something we should have had a year ago. Unfortunately, we're having it now. But I think this is a really, really crucial discussion to have. It's also the discussion that the Trump cult has never had. They have never questioned whether Trump has the ability, the acuity, the morality to do this job. It has been lockstep, marching, in formation for the last almost 10 years. I don't want to do that. I like Joe Biden. I hope he wins. He's not my cult leader.
Since my story went up, there's also a lot of people online, the Ian Miles Chungs, the right-wing people of the world, right? That have been saying, oh, look, finally the mainstream media is acknowledging that, Democrats are the real conspiracy theorists. I think it's so toxic because, as you mentioned, these people, right, Ian Mauschung, Glenn Greenwald and such, they have spread actual conspiracy theories. Can you talk about kind of like why it's so important to still acknowledge things like BlueAnon and not just ignore them?
Well, I think we should acknowledge this because it's doing the same thing that the conspiratorial sentiment on the right has done for a long time. It's driving people toward either hopelessness and despair or toward violence. And you're not seeing it at that level on the left yet. But that doesn't mean it's okay. It's not okay to just lie to people. It's not okay to spread conspiracy theories around and not address what's actually going on.
Yeah, it's a distraction. And I think it's really important, too, that we stamp that type of thing out before it becomes too pervasive.
Absolutely.
And I think the fact that you're seeing more and more of it from these centrist, Democrat, traditional voters, like these are pretty like mainstream people that, of course, as you mentioned, they've been getting more conspiratorial for years, especially around the Russia stuff. Sure. But this feels like a real departure and turning point. Why do you think Threads has emerged as a hub for this sort of BlueAnon, blue MAGA mentality?
Yeah, I think you're seeing a lot of this emerging on these Twitter alternatives. You know, I've certainly seen it on Blue Sky. I haven't been on Threads, but I know it's there. You know, people are looking to congregate in spaces where nobody disagrees with them. And we've seen this on the right with places like Gab, with places like Parler. It's all fear and hate and conspiracy theories all the time. And no discussion, no apostasy is required or desired. And I think the left is finding those spaces too, where they can just say what they want. No one's going to yell at them. No one's going to push any kind of alternative viewpoint. And look, I mean, X has a lot of problems, but I think that there is a little bit more of a vibrant discussion going on there than I think in either of the hermetically sealed far right or far left bubbles.
Yeah, I would not call Threads far left.
Okay.
But
I haven't been on there, and I'd rather drink a sand smoothie than do it. But,
let's talk about the political ideology of these people, because they're not far left, which has its own brand of conspiracy.
No, they're totally
right?
not. Yeah.
These are centrist Democrats. And I think that's what interested me so much and why I wanted to write this story, because the extreme far left and the extreme far right have always been sort of prone to conspiracism.
Sure.
But these centrist liberals have traditionally, prided themselves on being media literate, trusting places like the New York Times, right? And now you're seeing even them flip and engage with these centrist Democrat influencers that don't seem to have any regard for the truth. So, yeah, I totally agree that these sort of alternative social platforms have become deep echo chambers. No matter what your ideology, you can find the right platform, it seems like, to validate it.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is a lot of these more centrist influencers are kind of figuring out what a lot of really avowed far-right influencers and media figures figured out a long time ago, that there is a lot of money to be made and a lot of clout to be generated and a lot of infamy to be gathered by pushing the most extreme viewpoints. You know, there's been so much digital ink spilled over whether Alex Jones believes what he's actually saying or whether it's an act. It doesn't matter. What he believes is totally irrelevant. It's that he's telling people things that they want to believe, that they already think are true. And I think with a lot of these influencers, these pro-Biden influencers, you're seeing the same thing. You're pushing out conspiracy theories and unhinged nonsense to people who want to believe that Joe Biden is like persecuted and Donald Trump is an evil genius and would stop at nothing to get his way, when reality is a lot more nuanced and a lot weirder in some ways. I mean, so much of the need for something like QAnon was driven by the fact that Trump wasn't accomplishing anything in his first term. Here's a year into him being president. He hasn't locked Hillary up. He hasn't built the wall. Well, we need a conspiracy theory to explain why he's failed. His failure is a success. So that's where this stuff comes from. And it's intoxicating to get that kind of reaction online.
And, I was talking to the Threads Meta comms person over the weekend about my story just to get comment. And he was asking like, well, what could Threads have done better, right? And I was talking to other researchers too. To me, this isn't a tech problem. I think it's exacerbated by technology and the incentive structure of these platforms like you're mentioning. But I think the broader problem here stems from political distrust and people feeling kind of disenfranchised, like feeling powerless.
It's absolutely not just a tech problem, and it's not an internet problem. It's not a social media problem. You had in the 1800s people passing out pamphlets about how the Rothschilds controlled France. conspiracy theories adapt to new technology, but they're driven by the same hopes and fears that all of us have. And they stem from feeling powerless. You feel like there's nothing you can do, like you don't know what's going on. And the conspiracy narrative lets you know what's going on. It lets you feel like you're accomplishing something. So I think by addressing some of the issues that drive people to conspiracism, hopelessness, loneliness, lack of media literacy, lack of just understanding the way things work, lack of empathy. Those are things that drive people to conspiracy theories. Threads or VHS tapes or homemade pamphlets, those are just the way we spread those things.
What do you think it says about our political landscape or media ecosystem that pretty much everyone in, no matter what your ideology is now, is falling further and further into this conspiratorial thinking structure?
Well, I think we're living in this time right now where things are happening at this unbelievably accelerated rate. There is more just happening to us every day than probably happened to people 50 or 100 years ago in a week or a month. We are struggling to understand what's going on, why it's going on, and sort of who's benefiting from it, and why aren't I benefiting from it? And I think what's happening is we're now internalizing all of these things that are happening and melding them into our own grievances, our own things that have already gone wrong in our life. Well, here's a conspiracy theory that explains all of it. And here's a video I can watch. And here's a book I can buy. Here's a podcast I can listen to. So there's more stuff happening and more people trying to explain it using their own biases. And it gets really hard to not just turn all of it off. And then you don't know what's going on at all.
All of the conspiracy theories sort of revolve around this powerful group of secret elites that are working with the media to control the world, whether you think that's Hillary Clinton eating babies or, the New York Times or whoever else for the BlueAnon people. And I think to an extent that's true, right? We have record wealth inequality. There's way too much money in politics. But rather than address the systemic issues that created these conditions, these conspiracy theories instead have you yelling at other people online that are really just ideologically maybe slightly to your left. And I think that's a bigger problem too. I would wish that these BlueAnon folks would, I don't know, think a little bit more about structural power,
Yeah. Rick Perlstein, the historian, wrote a piece about what's actually in Project 2025. And people are just screaming at him. Oh, how dare you read this and talk about it maybe not working? It's like, it's actually important to realize what these things are. That's actually how you defeat it. You don't defeat it with conspiracy theories and just screaming at other people. You defeat it by understanding it and trying to work your way inside it and find the weak spots. That's how you win. You don't win with, conspiracy theories about a microphone not working or Trump rubbing stage blood on his ear. That's just not going to move the needle.
100%. All right, Mike. Well, thank you so much for joining me this week.
Well, thank you. This was great.
We'll be right back to chat about the biggest news stories this week after the break. Hi, I'm here with my showrunner, Zach Mack. We are going to chat about some of the big stories this week.
All right, let's do it.
So there was lots going on with the Trump shooting last weekend. One thing I noticed is almost right away, within hours, merch began hitting platforms like Amazon, Redbubble, and a bunch of Chinese e-commerce sites. I don't know if you've copped the Trump shooting merch yet, Zach, but this stuff was all over. There was T-shirts, there's keychains, there's mugs, there's hats. Like, you name it, you could get it on your doorstep within 24 hours.
I was impressed with the turnaround. I mean, obviously that photo is like sort of instantly iconic, but that turnaround was at such a rapid clip. Like, there's a whole industry behind that image overnight.
Especially coming from foreign retailers, people in China and other places working to get this stuff out fast. So I haven't seen anybody wearing it in person, but I know people have been taking a lot of pictures of people wearing this sort of shooting merch. Speaking of shooting merch, the shooter himself was wearing a Demolition Ranch t-shirt, which is a giant YouTube channel. It's kind of part of the broader GunTube universe. I will say Demolition Ranch is one of the more mainstream YouTube channels. It's so massive. Somebody compared it to like a Dude Perfect, but for guns, where it's kind of just... It's for gun enthusiasts. Of course, gun enthusiasts generally have a political leaning, but the owner of Demolition Ranch actually went on YouTube and issued this statement being like, this is crazy.
We were shocked and confused to find this out. The shooter who tried to assassinate Trump was wearing merch from my channel, wearing a a Demolition Ranch t-shirt. And that sucked to see that. And we never would condone that at all. I hate that.
Yeah, look, it's not surprising to me that a gunman is really into watching stuff about guns online. I'll just say that.
Yeah. To me, this reminds me a lot of when the Christchurch shooter shouted, "Subscribe to PewDiePie."
Yeah,
I feel like
weird.
these shooters and these people that get radicalized, they are very into internet culture and online culture. That doesn't mean that the content creators that they reference or wear the merch of are necessarily directly responsible for their actions. But I do think it can, allow us to pull back and take a look at the different cultures that we're seeing online, who's involved in what, and what sort of ideology these channels are fostering or at least creating communities for.
Yeah, I agree.
And then, of course, right after the shooting, you have the RNC this week, and
Yes.
dozens and dozens of right-wing content creators descending on Milwaukee to create podcast content, Instagram content, TikToks, etc. This is part of the RNC's youth outreach initiative. It's being run by these two Gen Z content creators, one of which I've known actually for a long time. And their whole goal is to essentially make Republicans cool on the internet. So they've got the Nelk Boys, they've got, a bunch of other sort of right-leaning TikTokers, YouTubers, and podcasts that are creating content from the RNC all week.
Yeah, I mean, the little bits of the RNC I saw, they just seemed very starved for cool people, so much so that they had to trot out Kanye West's ex-girlfriend, Amber Rose, who's not a rapper, even though she was labeled as a rapper, and put out a god-awful rap video. I don't know. Did you see that video she made?
I did.
It was
Yeah.
pretty embarrassing.
We voting Donald Trump, baby. America needs saving.
But yeah, she's right-wing now.
I think that I think that the right, as we've talked about, has always succeeded on the internet in a way, and they've always been able to wield attention. Where they are struggling is with Gen Z, which is more progressive. So I think having this sort of coordinated influencer program for the first time here at the RNC makes sense. I was at the RNC back in Cleveland in 2016. There were tons of content creators there. There were a lot of right-wing figures, but they weren't brought into the fold. They weren't given credentials. They weren't given all access passes.
Right.
And I think that's what's changed. I think that the right, much like the Democrats, recognizes that the internet is important and we need
Really
to
important.
cater to these people.
It's really important. In a lot of ways, it's like more important than the news outlets, right? Like,
Yeah, definitely. These are the people that are shaping the perception of the GOP to millions online.
I'm curious to see what the Democratic influencers have in store for Chicago coming up.
Yeah, the Democrats also have a coordinated influencer strategy this year. Although I spoke to a major YouTuber recently who has tons of subscribers, is very connected in the YouTube commentary world, and the Democrats denied him credentials, which I think is interesting. This is a guy that has consistently supported Democrats. He is more left-leaning, but he's the type of content creator they would want around. And so I think it'll be interesting to see who they choose. I mean, this has been sort of a constant struggle for the Democrats, is finding people to work with and turning away people who maybe have been vocally pro-Palestine and things like that.
Right. Yeah, I feel like both sides really need some image rehabilitation and some cool people backing them, because it's a little bleak on both sides.
Yeah, I think it's pretty bleak on both sides. I think politics people, DC people in generally, are not known for their knowledge of the internet.
Well, DC has got to be one of the most swagless cities I've ever been to.
It's true. All right, Zach. Well, thanks so much.
All right.
All right, that's the show. Power User is produced by Travis Larchuk and Jelani Carter. Our video producer is Brandon Kiefer. Our executive producers are Zach Mack and Nishat Kurwa. Power User is part of the Vox Media Podcast Network. You can watch full episodes on my YouTube channel at Taylor Lorenz. If you like the show, give us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. We'll be back next week with another episode. See you then.